I'm going to kick things off because I know that we're going to have a lively discussion. I have the privilege of saying hello and welcome. My name is Bruce. I'm Pilotlight's Deputy Chief Executive. And we're so thrilled to have you today and for Penny from getting on board to host what we hope is a lively discussion. We've got some great speakers with lots of experience to share. And then I know for many of you, you might be interested in the breakout rooms at the end. We'll share details about that. But look, why am I saying welcome? Well, Penny and I think we met sometime in the dark days of pandemic. We connected virtually. And quite frankly, I loved what Penny was trying to do with getting on board, changing the face of trusteeships, making trusteeships more accessible. And I thought there was such a great alignment to some of the work that Pilotlight does to help charities be more effective. And so much of that is often about supporting governance and leadership. So we thought it'd be great to bring our communities together and have a session today. So over to you, Penny.
Thank you very much, Bruce. So good morning, everybody. It's absolutely brilliant to see so many people here, keen beans, ready to discuss what makes an outstanding trustee. I run a charity called Getting On Board. We're a trustee recruitment and diversity charity, and we work directly with about 3,000 charity leaders a year. So this is a really, really hot topic and something that we consider actually all the time. But we all know that this topic really matters. That's why we're here. Trustees are the most senior leaders in charities, but I think we pay very little attention to trustee development and trustee performance. So it's really good to see so many people wanting to come and talk about this. And I think it's, of course, important for those of us who are trustees already. It's important for those of us who are aspiring trustees to think about, if I become a trustee, how am I going to be a decent one? And it's really important as well for those of us that work in charities, with charities, that volunteer with charities and support charities in other ways. I also think it's a really difficult question, what makes an outstanding trustee. There isn't a black and white answer, and I think that's why we need to talk about it, to try and kind of get under the skin of it. So I want to kick us off by asking you to introduce yourselves in the chat. Tell us who you are, which organisations you belong to, which hats you're wearing, and I'm sure that many of you are coming with multiple hats. I also want to really give us the green light for networking. So if you're after something today, tell us. So if you'd actually love a new trusteeship or your first trusteeship, tell us in the chat. Tell us the kind of organisation you might like to join. If you're from an organisation looking for trustees, tell us. Give us a link to the advert, or tell us, what you're looking for, where you are, what your charity does. Or if you want something else to do with this topic, just tell us. Feel free to privately message each other. If you don't want to be on the end of a message, just ignore it. But yes, we can't be in a room together, so let's act as if we are. So there's going to be lots of opportunities for questions, for comments, but we've got a really fantastic panel with a massive breadth of expertise who are joining us this morning. And I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves. So we've got Dilys, Mike, Norzaman and Michelle. So Dilys, would you like to start and tell us who you are and what kind of, how you've had experience of being a trustee and working with trustees?
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Dilys Wintercorn. And in terms of my day-to-day role, I'm head of grants at a new foundation called Youth Futures Foundation. And over the last year, I've been working with that foundation to set up its grant making processes, design programs, and deliver those funds. In terms of my experience overall, over the last 17 years, I've worked with small and large charities and philanthropists. Small charities being in the foothills of northern Ethiopia in Gonda, through to the larger ones such as Salvation Army and Comic Relief. And within those roles, I've led and designed multi-country philanthropic partnerships, designed various investments with a range of philanthropists. And that's what led me to being a trustee at the Pret Foundation, where I've been for over a year and a half and absolutely enjoying it. It's a very modest foundation, and it's great to be on board really to really promote what they do and to scale up their activities. In terms of my experience with trustees, worked directly with trustee boards, recruited trustees, and have worked to, I wouldn't say train, but more to bring them in to the organisation itself and to really draw on their skills and expertise. So yeah, really excited to be here today.
Thank you, Dilys. Michelle, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks. Morning, everybody. Yeah, so I'm Michelle Hill. I'm Chief Exec of TLC Total List of Change. So we're a relationships charity in the Northwest. But yeah, come wearing a couple of different hats. So have completed a Pilotlight program a few years ago. So we're a kind of ex-Pilotlight charity. As well as my Chief Exec role, I'm a trustee of a national charity called Standing Together Against Domestic Violence, which is my second trustee position. And I've also recently been appointed as a non-exec director of a housing association, so also bring a little bit of experience from that sector as well. So yeah, really passionate about the role of trustees and the importance of trustees. So really grateful to be here to share a little bit of the experience we've picked up along the way. Thanks, Penny.
Thank you. Thank you. Norzman, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Penny. My name is Nazman Rashid. I work as Chief Executive of a chartered institute in the UK. I'm currently chair of the Foundation for Social Improvement, and we have somewhere between 7,500 and 8,000 members that we provide support and training to. I also chair an international NGO, Play Action International. Over the last 30 years, I chaired a wide range of charities, some under £1 million turnover, the smallest actually under £500,000, and the largest over 100 million charities. So quite a wide range. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mike?
Hi, Mike Conway. I'm relatively new to the world of charity trustee work. 40 years in the oil and gas business around the world. I have been trustee of charities in the US, of United Way in Alaska, and in the Temple Theatre in Michigan. So very different kinds of things. I was for a short while a trustee of Outside the Box, a great charity in Glasgow. I've stepped down from that now, and I'm also working currently as a special advisor to two charities in Edinburgh, Canongate Youth and the Superpower Agency. And the role of a special advisor as opposed to a trustee is an interesting distinction, and if we have time today, we might want to get into that. Delighted to be here, delighted to help if I can.
Thank you very much. And it's really, really good to see the intros. We've got a real mix, as we expected. So we've got a huge mix of people who've been trustees many times, people who are charity CEOs, and a lot of aspiring trustees. And I think it's brilliant to actually think about this before you become a trustee, because I think a lot of us fall into trustee positions and then at some point think, oh, I wonder how I make sure I'm a good one of these things that I've become by accident. So let's kick off with some questions. First of all, I want to come straight back to you attendees. Tell us in the chat, what are the traits of an outstanding trustee? So tell us in a few snappy words, when you think outstanding trustee, what are the traits of an outstanding trustee? And while you're tapping away on that, panel, I want to ask you, what kind of trustee do you aim to be? Norzman, let's start with you. What kind of trustee do you aim to be?
Thank you very much indeed for that first question, Penny. As I said, I've been a trustee for over 30 years. When I first began my career as a trustee, I was learning, getting to grips, understanding the role. But over the last 10 years or so, in my portfolio, I pretty much only chair charities at the moment. And the first charity couple of charities you chair, you sort of want to put your vision and mission, rubber stamp it on there. But more recently, I think what I do and what I want to do is use my cross-sector experience to get the best out of my trustees, the best out of the executive, and be seen as a motivator and an influencer in the organization, so that when people think about the charity and they speak to me, they are motivated by how I sell the charity.
Great, thank you. And could you say more about that motivator role internally? How do you strike the balance between motivating staff and volunteers, but not interfering?
Well, quite often, trustee boards are somewhat divorced from the staff, and the larger the organization, the more that is the case. So at the Foundation for Social Improvement, for example, I actually do attend the main staff meetings for 10 minutes, and I get a chance to actually talk about whatever problem or issue the trustees are dealing with, and all staff that's a full staff meeting, and volunteers, they get a chance to maybe ask me questions as well. And I make sure that when I attend those meetings, I've got very positive things to say, and I am as encouraging as possible about what we're dealing with. And this has been particularly relevant during the pandemic.
Great, thank you. And Dilys, so I'd like to ask you what kind of trustee you aim to be. You had worked for charities before you became a trustee. So did you have a kind of idea, based on what your having worked with other trustees, of the kind of trustee that you wanted to be when you took up your first role?
Yes, I wanted to be present. And it's similar to what Ram was saying, not present at the committee and board meetings, but present within the staff membership body. And also present in terms of the strategy design. In terms of the trustee I wanted to be, and am trying to be, is one that listens, and to be there as a sounding board. Given my experience in philanthropy, grant making, fundraising and program design, it's taken those skill sets and working with the teams within the organisation to be that sounding board, and to be completely open with them. Also be a critical friend, and also to come with rational, constructive advice, and not to be overly emotive on issues.
How do you define rational advice in that context?
Yeah, I mean, rational, I guess I have in the position where, as a trustee, I'm not the founder. And so sometimes, with founders, it's their baby. And so taking the position that, I use my insights, really, use insights at fact, being the eyes and ears of the organisation. And that's what I bring to the table. And when I bring those insights to the table, it almost drowns out the emotive calls sometimes from other members, respectfully.
So you go with your evidence-based experience and having done your homework.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, being the eyes and ears and using the insights from my own profession.
Thank you. And Michelle, who, you're also a charity CEO, or you're also a member of charity staff, excuse me. So when you've been a trustee, how have those two things influenced each other? Having worked with a board yourself as a CEO and then being on a board, how have those two things influenced?
I mean, it's been a real insight, I think, joining a board after being a charity CEO. So I was a charity CEO before I was a trustee. And I suppose being a chief exec really made me realise the importance of that relationship with trustees, and how critical it is that relationship, particularly with the chief exec, is as positive and honest and open as it can be. And I think that's the approach that I've taken into my trustee role. So very much agree about being present. So something really, really practical about being present at meetings and being prepared for meetings. And that sounds really simple, but it's one of my biggest bugbears when I go to meetings and people haven't read papers that we've spent ages slaving over. So kind of that, and that sounds really simple, but actually it's a really big thing and really would affect the kind of the emotional health of me and my exec team if we go to board meetings and people weren't prepared. So there is something about some really simple things I've learned about being really well prepared, being very present, not saying things for the sake of saying things. So not feeling like you have to just say something, kind of really listening, a bit like Dilys said, really listening, asking the kind of searching questions. And also something as there's a balance between being really supportive but also offering a constructive challenge. And I think some of the best trustees are the ones who kind of walk that balance really well. So you need both. You need constructive challenge, but you also need the kind of pat on the back when things are going well. And I suppose the other thing for me is how much I value my trustees who care about my emotional health and well-being, and have checked in, especially over the last 18 months, about how I've coped. So that's also something that I try and take into the trustee role, is that kind of real care and concern for the team, and to make sure that you focus on strategy and governance and mission and vision, but also you've got to be focused on people. So asking those key questions as well, really.
Thank you so much in there. And I think, lots we'll come back to and unpack. Mike, what kind of trustee do you aim to be, or have you aimed to be when you've taken up new roles?
Well, I think if I'm honest, I'm still sort of searching for that. I mean, my intent in all of this is really to bring whatever skills and abilities I do to the sector and to individual organizations specifically. What I've discovered for my sins is that the things that worked for me in 40 years of corporate life internationally aren't necessarily the things that work in a charity meeting room on a wet Monday night. And you have to call on other things. And frankly, I found myself sorely tested on more than one occasion in that regard. So, but one of the reasons I went into it was also in a sense, for myself, to learn more, to do things I'd never done before. So that I'm getting that in spades. And I would probably echo much of what has already been said, and what is generally said about all of this. That an absence of listening is a sin that is visible for me, particularly with folks with my kind of background who come from successful careers in large organizations and therefore feel perhaps that they have something that others ought to appreciate. Very dangerous idea. And I think, a bias for listening it's so important, and it's enormously hard to do. A good friend of mine got so frustrated with one organization he worked with, he burst out, "What these people need is a damn good listening to." he knew he had to be proactive, but he also knew that there was no point in lecturing. And you can probably tell I'm quite good at lecturing. So listening, key skill. I also want to pick up on something that was said earlier, that high support is vital, but high support and no challenge is just a big soft place to be. And you end up being a friend of the organization rather than a trustee of the organization. And in a sense, you actually risk not stepping up to your full role. High support is necessary, but not sufficient. High challenge brings value, and balancing those two things. And somebody said this earlier, I think that I would just echo that. And finding that balance in both your role, but also in your behavior is difficult, particularly if you, like me, you come from an environment where, it was made up of tough people who spoke in tough language, and sadly, I do recall not that long ago it being described as a big boys game. I mean, with all that implies, that adjusting from a world where that has been the culture to a world where the culture is very, very different. It requires a sensitivity and an awareness and an adjustment that I've found very difficult, but I'm enjoying too. It's very rewarding as well. So I would particularly echo those two things.
Yeah, I really want to come back to both the balance between challenge and support and this journey from perhaps working in the commercial sector and then becoming a trustee, because I can see from the chat that there are people who want to become trustees who don't currently work in the charity sector. So I'd really like to come back to that. Yeah. So there's been some just phenomenal comments in the chat about, what are the traits of an outstanding trustee? I mean, we should bottle this, I think, and hold ourselves up to this and remember these are the things that we know make an outstanding trustee, and we don't always deliver on them when we are personally in a trustee role. We kind of forget. And there's some, passion for the cause, unafraid, engaged, challenging, lots about what Michelle was saying about actually reading the papers, being present, having the time, listening, which has come out from the panel as well. What I'm really interested about is that Mike is the only panelist to refer to skills, and there might be some, so there's so many comments there, I haven't read them all, but there might be some comments in the chat there. But I'm really interested between this kind of, there's a disjoint between how we recruit trustees and what we think is an outstanding trustee. So we very heavily recruit towards, we need finance skills or legal skills. And actually in our adverts, we hardly ever refer to any of this stuff. it doesn't really come out at all. And I can see Michelle vigorously nodding at this. So I'm going to come straight to Michelle on this. So, you know, what is more important? Is it skills? Is it soft skills? And actually, you know, by skills, I mean skills, knowledge, experience, networks, so the whole kind of hard package versus how you do this job.
It's a really hard question, but I think it is the both. And I think, so I know if we look at our board of trustees, getting the skill mix right across the whole of the board is really important, and having an idea about the skills that we need, and if we've got gaps in any areas, knowing that we're recruiting for those skills. So there is a little bit about bringing kind of professional skills and outside skills to the organisation that kind of strengthen the board. But it's almost like that's the first sift. So that's the kind of, okay, that's what we need. You know, if we've got a gap for finance, we need to go out for somebody with a finance background, or a gap for marketing, or whatever it is. But actually, it's definitely only one part of the package. And so organisationally, we moved about 18 months ago to values-based recruitment, and we use values-based recruitment in the way that we recruit trustees as well. And that's around, it's really important for us that there's a good fit between the organisation and the board. And that's much more about those kind of soft skills, the attitude. And the other thing that we've done over time is we've changed our recruitment process. So I suppose the other hat that we wore is that TLC were lucky enough to be on a Getting on Board programme, which helped with our TLC recruitment processes. But we really changed our recruitment process. So for trustees, we take quite a bit of time. We really get to know people. We do quite a lot of informal conversations before we go straight forward to kind of an interview. And that's because we want to be really open and honest about the requirement. So we want to talk about the kind of trustee that we want, the kind of expectation that means in terms of time, the kind of level of engagement that we want. But we also want to get beneath the surface of what the individual wants to give. So I think you do need the very physical skills. You need those, especially if you've got deficits in your board where you've got gaps. You need to be able to fill those, but you really need to find a charity where there's a good fit, and that's a kind of hearts and minds fit as well as a skills fit, I think. So I think it's probably a blend of the both, I'd say.
Thank you. And let's bring Dilys in. So we've got lots of people who are aspiring trustees here. Based on what Michelle's saying about actually, you know, charities need a match with hard skills, knowledge, experience that's going to help them, but also this soft stuff. As an aspiring trustee, how do you find the match, and how do you show the charity that you've thought about some of this softer stuff?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to, well, first selecting why do I want to become a trustee? What skills do I have that I'd want to impart, the hard skills as well as the soft skills, and then thinking about, okay, what cause am I really passionate about? You know, and then looking at the various causes and the types of, you've got the cause, and then next is the type of organisation. What type of organisation do I want to impart my skills, you know, upon? And being really selective, as selective as it, you know, if you were applying to go to university. So, you know, selecting the course, I'd say to be really selective about the type of organisation you want to work within. And then to have a look, yeah, it's almost like a scoping study, you know, to have a look of the various organisations with the cause that is specific to yourself. And yeah, just have a look at them, you know, have a look at who the trustees are, what are their backgrounds, have a look at their senior leadership team, have a look at their annual reports, you know, to see, you know, how they manage funds, how they look after staff, have a look at their policies, you know, do they have, say, EDI policy in place, you know, get onto the teeth of an organisation, I would say, before making that formal approach to them.
That's great, thank you. That was it in a nutshell, wasn't it? And for anybody who is looking for a trustee position or wants to know more, that one of the breakout rooms is about becoming a trustee after this, which will run from 9:30 to 10. There's a really interesting point from George here in the chat. How about the balance between recruiting skills to the board as opposed to buying skills in as and when needed? And I guess buying or using a Pilotlight project. It would be wrong not to point that out as well. So yes, we don't always need to have everything on our board, do we? And then Holly, and I think from your name it's Holly, to be able to align career professional skills with the qualities of compassion, service to the community and dedication to social change. I feel that sums it up so well. So let's come back. So please now pile in with any questions in the chat, attendees. what would you like to ask the question? What are your thoughts on any of these aspects of what makes an outstanding trustee? And while you're doing that, Norseman, do you think there's even such a thing as an outstanding trustee?
Yeah, of course there are, because of the many boards I've chaired or been a trustee of. I always look at some bits, oh my God, they're amazing. And what makes them amazing is, one, their motivation and passion for the core values of the organization and what we do. And that is a big lesson for people wanting to apply for jobs, is aim yourself, target yourself at the subject matter and core of what a charity is about. The other thing is that beyond their professional expertise that they were recruited for, quite often they go beyond that and look at their networks and connections and help with other broader issues. And the trustees that you love the most are the ones that volunteer to help the other trustees when they chair a little working group or lead on something. And the trustees I really like is when we've got a HR issue, a legal issue, a contract management issue, a finance issue, they'll give the officer, the member of staff, a little bit of extra time and advice and guidance. So what you get is, we recruit based on these skills. We forget about the behavior, the attitude, and the time that someone will give. But then when you get into the reality of a trustee board, you find you like some people more than others because they're giving more of themselves to you. And actually, by doing that, they actually feel better. There are boards I've been on when I've not been asked to do anything, except turn up to the board, read the papers, agree or disagree, bit of support, bit of challenge. And I think, what am I doing here? I'm not helping anyone. I'm not adding any particular value. Somebody else could do this. So it's getting the trustees engaged, And I should also add one caveat. It is very different in different sizes and types of charities. So if you're a multi-million-pound charity, with, let's say, tens of millions turnover, you may be treated slightly differently. But the vast majority of charities in this country are very, very small, and sometimes they kind of just take what they can get in terms of volunteers. But here we're trying to talk about how to best position the opportunity for the trustee and also select the best trustee. And the last point I'll say is, on the makeup of those trustee boards, is look for some diversity, both particularly in gender and race, because it's really it's more obvious to me that the more balanced and mixed boards of trustees are actually challenged in different ways.
Thank you. And I think a really related question here from Karen. So Karen has said, what happens when you join a board and then you realise that the rest of the board members don't really do anything? So, Norseman, you've spoken about when you join a board and you notice people and you think, oh, they're really good. I can learn something from them. And actually, that's been my experience as well. I kind of notice why, I can see that they're making a real difference. What are they doing to do that? And can I replicate that in my own way? But what happens if perhaps you're all in for development and contributing to the charity, but the people around you are just turning up, not reading the papers, not doing anything beyond the meeting? Mike, how would you handle that? What would you advise Karen?
Well, I wish I thought I would handle it brilliantly, but I probably had to be a little clumsy. I'm actually still fairly functional when it comes to these things. And I know my thinking will mature a little to be a little closer to where Norseman is, but I do think about it as more a team of people who are there to contribute. So, if people are not contributing, then, first of all, it's a hard thing to identify, because the biggest contribution that some trustees bring is their support. And they become like friends of the charity. And it's very, very hard to ask a friend to move on when it may be you're actually relying on those friends to support you. If you're a founder and you're fighting people who want to change the charity from what you created, or if you're a CEO who's come in with one agenda and you find the board are going the other way, friends are really important. And so, there's a complexity to this, so my approach tends to be fairly functional, if you like. Sort of, what are you there for? What do you bring? And I actually think that for aspiring trustees, it's enormously helpful when wrestling with the role to be confident that you're bringing something specific. I mean, for example, you might be an IT specialist and you think, well, why does a charity need an IT specialist? Well, there's going to be a time and there's going to be a place where it might not be that you fix an IT problem, but you know how to go about it. And you know some people who do. You might bring in the right people, or you might access, or you might simply bring diagnostics to the problem. If you've got something to bring, then it boosts your confidence as a trustee, and it, in a sense, legitimizes your place on the board.
Thank you. And a lot of this speaks to how, you know, the most common way of becoming a trustee at the moment in the UK is by being asked. So by being asked, often from personal contacts, and actually that then leads to this feeling that somebody's doing something else a favour, that actually just turning up to the meetings is all you've signed up to do, and there often isn't a good match between what the charity really needs and what that individual has to bring, because it hasn't been examined in a formal process. So yeah, there's a pitch there for open trustee recruitment processes. And I think this question, what makes an outstanding trustee, it kind of can't be considered for an individual, can it? Because actually we're a team and we're a board of trustees. And you can have one person who's really trying to pull their weight, but if the other people around them aren't, it's unlikely to be a decent board. And yeah, that's right back to Karen's question. So does it depend, what makes an outstanding trustee? Does it depend who you ask? And I'm just looking at Ed's comment here, just a reminder that actually, you know, most charities in the UK are tiny. I saw a stat, which is, and I can't remember the percentage, but the majority percentage of trustees have no other volunteers or staff to support them in their roles. So they kind of are the charity. So they're going to be very hands-on. And they're going to be operational as well as strategic, because there is no choice because the organisation is very small and doesn't have any staff. But does it, if the organisation is large enough to have staff, does it depend, does the answer to what makes an outstanding trustee depend on who you ask, Michelle? If we were to ask a CEO, would you get a different answer than if we were to ask a service user, a more junior member of staff, the chair of trustees, a fellow trustee, and so on?
Absolutely, I think the answer is different, because I think the relationships with different parts of the organisation are different. So so the relationship between a chief exec and a trustee, and particularly a chair of trustees, is a really key relationship. It's, you know, it is. I'm going to go back to what I said before. It's a funny mix of support and challenge, and say that that's been picked up in the chat as well. That's a really special, really important relationship, because being a chief exec particularly can be quite isolating at times. You know, I've got a fantastic kind of senior leadership team underneath me, and I've got a fantastic board above me, but quite often I'm a bit stuck in the middle. And the last 18 months of navigating the pandemic have never felt more like that. And so what I've needed from my trustees over the last 18 months has been very different than what my staff team needed. So we've got a staff team of about 100, and what I need from my trustees is very much what my staff team need from me. So my team have needed reassurance, they've needed some honesty, they've needed some transparency about where we're going. I've needed quite a bit of that from the trustees. So I think it is different depending on the size of the organisation. But there is also something about trustees being relatively visible. So and making sure that staff members, senior teams, as well as the chief exec, have a relationship with the trustees. So, because obviously there is a danger otherwise that if the trustees relationship is only with the chief exec, that you can get stuff hidden, and that chief execs can only present what they want you to hear. So there is something about that accountability and that kind of check and balance that you need as a board to make sure that you can really scrutinise what's going on, rather than become a kind of rubber stamping board. So I think the answer is different, which is why it's a really difficult question, isn't it? Because it's such a multifaceted role, I think, depending on the organisation and the role that you need to take.
Absolutely. And this let's go on to this balance between, as trustees, our role is to challenge but also support. So how do you balance that off, Norzaman, in all of your different board experiences? And what have you kind of learned over the years? Do you think that's something that you've become more aware of and have got better at as time has gone on?
Yeah, and you know, I've been in the trustee business for 30 years. So you might say when I first started, I was a bit of a clever dick, you know, always challenging, bringing, like Mike was saying, commercial models to the table and winding everybody up. But, you know, I've learned in no short measure that actually the best way to get both an executive team and a trustee team together is to be as positive and as supportive as possible. So even when I kind of maybe disagree with something, I'm always looking for the bit that I can support the most, and then to position my challenge as a question, an open-ended question, enabling people to respond to that. Also, I'm never looking for a response immediately, particularly if the issue is complex. And so, you know, giving people, the executive, particularly time to come back to it. And then, you know, I may end up with trustees who were behaving the way I used to behave, you know, imposing their ideas. And so I do try to sort of give some commentary on that as a chair of a board of trustees, but I also try to give time to the executive to actually consume that challenge and bring it back. And so, you know, my advice and guidance is always stay on the motivational, the positive side, but look for ways of how to support people to deal with the challenge.
Thank you. I think some really great advice there. And let's just pick up the clever dick bit, which I think is really, really fascinating. Mike, I want to come back to you because you talked about, you know, being in a large corporate environment, going into a trustee role in a smaller charity, and how that transition can be difficult. So I'd love you to talk more about what are the mistakes you've made that we can learn from, that people in similar situations, and I can see there's some people in commercial environments, others in the public sector. I saw someone's a civil servant who wants to become a trustee. What do we need to do to learn about this new environment we're stepping into as trustees?
Well, for me, but on my practical experience, one of the enormous difficulties I've learned is that wherever I go, there I am, as they say. And so I was very careful in warning one charity when they invited me to be a trustee, are you sure that you want someone like me? And the message was very, very clear. Oh, absolutely, we need challenge. You know, we're much too comfortable. What you bring is a fresh perspective, and we need you to add a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and that'll force us to address some issues that we're just not prepared to talk about because they're uncomfortable. And you always put stuff on the table, all this kind of thing. But I'm also absolutely, when Osman is, people say they want that, but actually they don't, or they may not. Because in reality, these are enormously difficult conversations, and I'm absolutely in the same place as Osman on this. You, irrespective of what people say about bringing fresh perspectives and a new voice and a wind of change and all this kind of stuff, in reality, you have to regard human beings as being, you know, human beings. And building that support, demonstrating understanding, being prepared to set aside your mental models and consider other ones and be open to that will then potentially make people open to your new perspective or your different perspective if brought in. And I have discovered there are many qualities in the third sector, and one of the cultural aspects of it that I have learned is that, with all due respect to all the charity people, it's a hard sector to bring challenge unless it's done skillfully, carefully, sensitively, and because the people just shut down if you bring it in a clumsy, awkward way. And
do you think the fact that you know, that any charity staff are likely to be actually, you know, we're often really badly paid, massively overstretched and under-resourced, and our fellow trustees are volunteers. So do you think that brings a distinct dynamic? I'm not asking if it's right, but do you think that changes things?
I think it does. I think it does. Although there was a very courageous woman in Glasgow who works for a charity that I used to be a trustee of, who actually said to me, these were her words, you know, we need to get over ourselves. We use this as an excuse. We are an organization. This is what we signed up for. We need to execute well. We need to be professional. We need high standards, and we need to deal with problems and issues because people are giving us money to be effective in what we say we're going to do. They do not wish us to lose that money in waste and inefficiency and a failure to deal with very real issues because we're underpaid and hard worked and so on. We kind of have to get over ourselves. Very courageous woman, and I, as you can hear, I liked her approach. But it's an immensely difficult thing to do, given the context in which many charities are operating, and that's where the real balance of support and challenge has to stay, because you cannot rely on the fact that these people are well paid and need to just pony up to the bar. You just can't bring that to the party.
Thank you. Sharon Smith, are you happy to, yes, you, when Mike said, you know, people say they want challenge, but they don't really, do they? You bodily recoiled from the computer and nodded as if you were going to pop out the screen. So
yeah,
tell me what you were thinking there.
Oh, no, I didn't. I totally concur with what Mike said. In fact, I had a similar situation. My background is I'm a chartered accountant, CFO. And I remember years ago, I had an interview when I first came to the UK with a property group, which was very, and I think to this day still really is, very kind of laddish. Maybe wide boy, that's a word I learned when I got to the UK. And they said they wanted to change. They wanted to bring a woman in and mix it, but they didn't. And I kind of sent a couple of them, I think, were really gung-ho on it. But generally, I think it would have been just beating my head against a wall. No single person is going to come in and change a culture.
And I think that is a really important message for aspiring trustees, isn't it? If we're trustees that we can see we're going to be the difference on the board, whether that's, you know, race, gender, age, different backgrounds, different expertise, there are things we can do as aspiring trustees, I think, to try and gauge the culture on a board, to try and work out, are they really open to what I'm bringing, or are they just paying it lip service?
Yeah, I want with themselves on that.
Thank you, Sharon. Dilys, I want to come on back to your point about kind of, and I'm sorry that if I'm wrongly paraphrasing, you do tell me, but you talked about challenging through, what I heard was challenging through evidence rather than emotion. So, you know, if you think, I don't agree with this, rather than going at it with all the emotions and I just don't agree with it and throwing your toys out the pram, I'm actually thinking, why don't I agree with it? And I'm going to go off and kind of get some proper information and read the papers. And tell us more about that.
Yes, and part of that is around what Norseman was saying about, you know, you may have, you know, a concern, but you articulate it as a question, a positive question. But yeah, how I tend to deal with or put across rational, constructive arguments is to go away, take what the challenge is, to go away and to gather data and intelligence to give a picture. For instance, I worked with trustees about 10 years ago. I was leading the trustees. It was a child sponsorship charity. And I saw that my skills background in development studies, see that child sponsorship in and of itself wouldn't alleviate poverty. And child sponsorship could counter really what it was trying to do, because most families would have one child, i.e. the boy, being educated. And so, in short, the challenge for me was to move the charity from a child sponsorship model to a community development model. And the charity had been set on this child sponsorship model for 20 years, since its existence. And I thought, okay, how am I going to move the trustees and the founder on this journey? And so what I did was to go back and to just pull together a literature review to demonstrate that child sponsorship in and of itself wouldn't alleviate poverty. There's a wider forces at play, the ability of the parents to get a job, the local infrastructure, and also quality of the schools, and developed a theory of change. Sat down with the board and presented it to them. And there were many questions that came out of that. Yeah, we can see this makes sense. But then looked at their concerns around how do we implement this? What about our donors? And over the course of 6 months, it was a case of sitting down with each member to take them through, again, that theory of change, and also how we would go about in implementing that. So yeah, for me, in that instance, it was about using hardcore data to show how to scale up the charity's activities, and also about sustainability. You know, going back to the core purpose of the organisation, poverty alleviation. And so having that as the emphasis, you know, this would be the end route, really, or the I guess, roadmap. Another role, at my role now at the Pret Foundation, it's very much a corporate board. All the members are from the business itself. And I am one of the only members who've come from the philanthropy charity sector. And so I came in with, I guess I saw it as a challenge in terms of, you know, educating a corporate board on how to do philanthropy, if that makes sense, how to connect with their audience in a giving setting, as opposed to that consumer, you know, corporate piece. And over the course of the year that I've been there, I've managed to do that by first, again, presenting where the organisation sits as a grant maker itself. You know, when we look at other grant makers of its size, doing what it does, you know, holding a spotlight as to where they are, really. And that gives the board an idea as to the reality of their position. And also it can break down some of the risk. Sometimes trustees, we are risk adverse, and it sort of lends a hand in showing that some of the risks that we need to take. Sometimes it's a bit of a paradigm shift, and it goes back to spending time with members of the board, senior leadership, the CEO, and also the staff team. And currently what I do outside of the quarterly meetings is I take time out to have a coffee, an hour coffee with the CEO, and then an hour coffee with other members of the team.
Thank you so much, Dilys. I think there's what I think is coming out so loud and clear from the panel is the commitment to being a trustee is, you know, that it isn't just going to meetings, that the kind of commitment that you've talked about, Dilys, to wanting to seek the right change, as you know, in your role as board member, in your role as trustee, and then the amount of work that you've put into that, I think is really inspirational.
I'm also a bit of a nosy busybody, so I like to get into facts, and I also, yeah, I research philanthropy, so you know, it's always in my mind.
And this is, isn't it, what you've talked about also shows how important it is to get somebody on your board who's actually got relevant expertise, because clearly you couldn't have done that if you were, I don't know, a biologist, or, you know, working in a completely different field. You might have brought other things, but actually the relevance of your expertise has been very key. So just, I've seen notes from Stephen and Abby about the usefulness of Pilotlight, of being a Pilotlighter, of having Pilotlighters into organisations in terms of understanding kind of differences between sectors. And I think that it's a really, really good point. There's 2 Pilotlight sessions in the breakout rooms at 9:30, one on having a Pilotlight, sorry if I'm using the wrong language, Bruce, do step in and tell me if I'm using the wrong language, becoming a Pilotlight volunteer, and another on having Pilotlighters into your charity. So if you're interested in that, do hang on at 9:30. Steph Malish, you've made a comment which I'd love you to speak to. Are you willing to do that? I can't actually see you on my screen. Are you there?
I'm here.
Brilliant. So
yes.
Tell us about your comment about disrespectfulness.
I think I was unable to get on to the start of the meeting, so apologies. And this may have been picked up already. But with some trustees who come in and they're so busy telling you what you should be doing. You need to be doing this, you need to be doing that, you ought to be doing this, you ought to be doing that, and totally disregarding that you as a CEO have been actually working at a senior level, perhaps in a CEO role for a lot of years. I've worked in the value sector for 25 years, and I'm sure lots of other people have as well. But then someone come in and saying, well, you need to be doing it like this. Why aren't you doing it like that? And it's like, I have been doing this for some time. There is that experience. And I find that a little bit frustrating when trustees come in with that attitude of, you know, and I think someone has already referred to that and said, you know, I came in from a corporate and trying to almost impose corporate procedures and practices on organisations that might be 6 people. You know, we don't need, you know, it needs to be fit for purpose. And I think I find that a little bit frustrating from some trustees, and I'm a trustee myself, and I try not to do that, but I definitely find myself erring sometimes and saying, well, have you thought about doing something like this? And I'm like, ooh, I've just turned into things that I hate, that really irk and irritate me as a CEO. So I think it is a fine balance. But I think if we can say out loud, you know, sometimes it does feel really disrespectful to some of the work that the CEOs are doing and those senior managers, that trustees sometimes don't appreciate it, particularly when they're uber enthusiastic at the beginning. So just putting that out there. So I think that was what I was talking about. And I don't know if that had been picked up before. If it has, apologies. As I said, I was struggling to get onto the meeting at the beginning. But yeah, so many things that have been said, I resonate.
Thank you. And I think, you know, as a charity CEO myself, and you know, and Michelle spoke about this a little bit. I think, you know, I guess all of us with our different hats on need to try and put ourselves in the shoes of the other people with different hats on, don't we? And it's interesting, a lot of that has come out here, hasn't it? It's come out about the different roles that the people that we're working with in our trustee role, and also different sectors that our day jobs might be in, and how that influences the kind of, you know, how we act and what our expectations are. Now we've got about 3 more minutes, so thank you for all the phenomenal comments. And somebody has said, can we share the chat? So Julia, if we're able to share it, that would be brilliant. Do let us know if you've put anything in the chat you don't want shared with the people here, although everybody's seen it, so it should be fine. Just ping us a message about that. So I want to end with one final question, and I'm going to ask all the panelists. And my question is, what legacy do you want to leave in an organisation? When you leave as a trustee, what do you want your legacy to be? Norzaman, let's start with you.
You might be surprised that I've never actually thought of that in all of the charities that I've been involved in. But I would say that when you step down, it's nice to have been appreciated for specific contributions that you might have made. And for someone like me that works a lot endlessly for different types of charities, you know, you bring what you bring. I'm always looking for them to say something positive about what I've left. But if there was one thing, as someone who chairs a lot of charities, I'd like to think that you set a tone, a professional tone for how that board is run and its relationship with the executive.
Thank you. Mike, what would your legacy be? What would you like it to be?
I haven't thought about it either. I would like to think that people reflect and say, well, yes, he was a challenging person, but he challenged from a good place, not to make us wrong, but to make us better. And if I can overcome my tendency to emphasize the challenge over the support, then that may result in such a legacy. But again, one of the things you do find out as a trustee is it's not about you. It's about whatever it is the charity is trying to do. And that's quite hard to give up as well.
Thank you. I think that's a really important point. It's not about us at the end of the day, is it? It's not about us as individuals. Dilys, what would you like your legacy to be?
My legacy, gosh, I guess legacy, I've always thought I just want the organisation to win. You know, I want to be there at a time when they've made a great stride, you know, they've won something, you know, something significant milestone, and to have been a part of it in any way, whether it's guidance or signing something off, but yeah, to have been a part of an organisation winning.
Thank you. And Michelle?
Finishing up with that's a hard one, isn't it? But I think for me, it's around, I suppose ideally would be that you've contributed to making the organisation better at serving the needs of those it's there to serve. So I think for me, the legacy is about making the charity able to meet those needs of the people it's there to serve better and more effectively. So in any way that you've left legacy where you've made that contribution, I think that would be a fantastic one.
Straight back to the service users.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, great, thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you so much, Mike, Norzaman, Michelle and Dilys. Thank you all of the attendees for piling in with the absolutely phenomenal comments and questions and observations. Really fantastic. Do look at Pilotlight and Getting on Board websites for further resources. I'm going to pass back to Julia now, who's going to close and tell you about the optional breakout rooms, which are running between 9:30 and 10.